Obviously, longevity is getting a higher and higher profile, but at the peak of that profile is blue zones. Everyone loves and wants to talk about that topic. So it's a pleasure to be talking to you. So tell me, first of all, though, how did you get into the topic of longevity? What was it that drew you in? Putting blue zones aside for the moment, what was it that attracted you?
So I was working with National Geographic, and I developed a bit of an expertise for harnessing the wisdom of the crowd to solve mysteries. And most of the mysteries involved archaeological mysteries, why the Maya civilization collapsed, did Marco Polo go to China? But I developed a proficiency for networking with top experts, synthesizing information, and then solving mysteries. And in 1999, the World Health Organization came out with a paper proclaiming Okinawa to have the longest disability-free life expectancy in the world. And I thought, now there's a good story. There's a good mystery. And 1999, we mounted our first expedition to Okinawa, and we went to try to parse out an explanation to understand why these people are living such long and healthy lives.
Brilliant and really interesting. I'm sure we'll pick on that later, that you focus there on disability-free life expectancy rather than life expectancy, which I had plenty to explore there. And blue zones, what was sort of what was the discovery there, and what drew you towards that topic?
Well, so I had this idea that if there are long-lived populations in Okinawa, there must be long-lived places elsewhere in the world. And about the same time that the Danish twin study was publishing findings that only about 20% of how long we live as a population is dictated by genes, the 80% is something else. And I reasoned that 80% something else might exist in these populations. And I got a grant from the National Institutes on Aging to work with team up with demographers. And there's a handful of them whose expertise is verifying ages. And National Geographic got in a little trouble in 1974 with their article about Vilcabamba Valley and the Caucasus and the Hunza Valley. They just anecdotal. So the idea behind this project would be to really spend years verifying ages, and did nothing for 2 years except go through data, look at birth certificates, cohorts of people and over 90, and follow them until their death, and adjust for immigration, emigration. It was a big job done by peer-reviewed scientists, and we identified these 5 areas where people are living statistically longest, and then with another group of experts struck out to find the correlates or the common denominators, and that's the base of Blue Zone's work.
And I think there's so many things that are fascinating. I think demography is a fascinating topic, and because it's one of these big aggregate trends that affects each and every one of us. We all have a birth, we all have a death. It's about family structure, relationships, length of life. But it's funny how hard it is to get most people interested in demography. But with Blue Zones, you seem to have completely captured people's imaginations. What do you put that down to?
You're right. It's complex, and the working for National Geographic, you're under pressure from two sides. The first is you need to get it right for the scientists and the fact checkers, and that requires, I think, having a complete understanding, like not just buying into the complex words, the Gaussian or the regression analysis, but being able to take complex ideas and simplify them accurately. And the advantage with National Geographic is they understand that the way to people's brains is through their hearts. So first of all, we find these beautiful emblematic images that tell the story, and people love those pictures. But my job as a writer requires me to metabolize the science into a few key characters who represent the population. So most journalists find a centenarian, 100-year-old, and then they find out that centenarian, drank a shot of whiskey every day and ate eggs. And then the headline is eggs and whiskey are the secret to longevity. Whereas I would do a meta-analysis of what these people have eaten over time from dietary surveys, and find sort of the the average. I mean, I'm simplifying here, and then finds, kiss enough frogs until I found a captivating centenarian who represented the population. And that takes a lot of work, a lot of time, years. But at the end of the day, you have both scientific responsibility and you have a very good Trojan horse to deliver the message to people. And, except for a few irresponsible players, I think the work has stood the test of time. And, I'm here 20 years later, got hired by 70 cities to take these principles and, actually lower healthcare costs in cities and effectively raise their life expectancy.
Yeah, which of course there's few things more important today. But I love that idea of taking the aggregate demographic trends and then finding the people who sort of represent them. I think that individual focus is utterly key. And I love your way of starting from the Danish twin study of 20% genetic, 80% something else, which has to be behavior and the environment. But pointing to these sort of blue zones, I think is a great way of doing that. So Jonathan Swift, the Irish satiricist, once said, basically, we all want to live a long time. None of us want to get old. And I think that's sort of part of this sort of eternal fascination. And you said that you're focusing on not life expectancy itself, but disability-free life expectancy. And I know, you perhaps you want to recount a little bit what you think are key in the blue zones about producing that long period of life that is healthy and a compression of morbidity. What are the key headlines, just for those few people who may not have heard them? And then I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into some of them.
Okay, so there's two sets of them. It's one set is what people do in blue zones, and then the other important sort of discipline is how you put it to work in people's lives in an effective way. So let's start with diet, because everybody's interested in diet. Now, if you want to know what a 100-year-old ate to live to be 100, you have to know what she ate as a little girl and middle age and newly retired. So to get at that, we aggregated 155 dietary surveys from all 5 blue zones. And I got Harvard's Walter Willett to help me do the meta-analysis. And it's so clear in these areas. And by the way, it's Nicoya Peninsula of Costa Rica, Okinawa, Japan, Sardinia, Italy, just the highlands, 5 villages, Icaria, Greece, and among the Seventh-day Adventists in Loma Linda. And what you see clearly over time, traditionally speaking, they're eating 90 to 100% whole plant-based food. It's actually, Andrew, a high carb diet. And there's a lot of people like carbophobes out there, but you have to remember that both lentil beans and jelly beans are carbs. So we're talking the lentil bean end of things. So the 5 pillars of every longevity diet in the world are whole grains, whole corn, wheat, and rice, greens and other garden vegetables, but I would say to lead with greens, tubers like sweet potatoes, nuts, it's usually go-to snack, and I would say the cornerstone of every longevity diet is beans. And a cup of beans a day is associated with about 4 extra years of life expectancy. But in addition to that, they do eat meat about 5 times a month on average. A lot less fish than you would think from these places. No significant cow's dairy. Of course, very low sugar, about a quarter of the amount of added sugar in the American diet. And when it comes to drinking, it's mostly water, but also herbal teas, several of which have inflammation and anti-inflammation characteristics and antioxidants. Coffee, good news for most of us. And then inconvenient, and I'm very aware of the current epidemiology, most people in blue zones that are making it to 90 drink most days of their life. I just saw a survey from Icaria. It's well over 80% of the people over 90 drink most of their life. But remember, it's not alcohol. It's wine. It's homegrown, sort of slightly lower alcohol, organic wine. So I thought that was an interesting input. So that's what people do. And you say, well, that sounds like common sense, but it's not common sense. The most important insight is how they do it for long enough to make a difference. Because, Andrew, as you know, there's nothing you can do this week, this month, or this year that'll have any bearing on whether or not you're alive in 26 and how healthy you are. The insight from Blue Zones is if you want to live a long time, you don't seek a silver bullet. It's first of all silver buckshot. It's lots of um, nudges and defaults that govern your unconscious decision, not your conscious decision, your unconscious decision. And they're deployed for not a few months or years, but for decades or a lifetime. And that's the crucial insight that policymakers need to grasp before we start seeing any bending of the curve of increasing chronic disease and obesity.
Yeah, and I do like that emphasis upon, one of the challenges I have, we address this as an aging society, and it's always about negative thoughts of decline. And we go from aging to old to end of life to death. So it's all pretty negative stuff. But as you're focusing on here, if you want to live a long and healthy life, it has to start early, and it's something that's embedded right the way through. And whether I think that's your actions or the community or medical interventions, I think that's key. And I loved your earlier comment about the wisdom of the crowd, because, of course, there's lots of medical experts saying this is what we should do to live a long life. But you're going out and just seeing what certain communities do, I think, is a really nice way of looking at it. Because if we're looking at quality versus quantity of life, I also think with quality of life, we've got to listen to people and not the scientific community about the
I like
quality
that.
of life. But so the notion of the blue zones is people age differently or better because of the longer disease free. One of the issues that I think is very interesting here is that we've got to change how we age as we're living longer, and you're looking at the blue zones as exemplars for how we might do that. But what's that attitude towards age as well? Is it different?
Yes.
Do they think about aging differently? Do they think about older people differently? Do they care less about aging? I just wonder.
Yes. Just to make something clear, these people don't have superior bodies that you and I and everybody listening right now. They're heterogeneous populations, so they don't have some sort of genetic, population-wide advantage. They're living a long time simply because they're avoiding the avoidable diseases that foreshorten our lives, that much lower rates of type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, most of which is avoidable, several types of cancers, mostly of the GI tract and breast and colon, and dementia, a fraction of the rate of dementia. And these people are living longer, healthier lives just because they're not getting sick. When it comes to attitudes, yes. I mean, in the United States here, we have this social security system that's always on the brink of bankruptcy, and we're worried that, the baby boomers or even Gen X is going to finally bankrupt that. The attitude's very different. In blue zones, older people are considered treasures, literally treasures. Their 96th birthday in Okinawa is the biggest day of your life. Older people in Sardinia, it would shame the family to put your aging parent in a retirement home. Instead, your aging parent is at home. Their agricultural or culinary wisdom is harnessed every day. They're in charge of the gardens. They help determine when to plant and when to sow, how to make the wine. They're in charge of childcare. There's something called the grandmother effect that has shown that when there's grandmas in the family, the children have lower rates of mortality and certain diseases. So instead of fearing older people, they're embraced, put to work. So they feel a sense of purpose, older people. They have a reason to get up in the morning. They have a reason to stay active. They have a reason to take their medicines, et cetera. So it's a very different attitude than what is emerging here in the United States, where over 50% of Americans will end up in a retirement home at some time in their lives. And the moment you enter a retirement home, your life expectancy drops.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is striking to me how, as looking at the US and the UK, as our likelihood of becoming old has increased, our attitudes toward being old has got worse. There's a really interesting shift. There's a nice paper looking at meta-analysis of US newspapers and books that shows 150 years ago, when older people were mentioned, it was always in the context of family or civil society or trust. And now it's always just about dementia and care homes. And it's a remarkable shift when the more likely we are to get old, the more we fear it. And if we underestimate the capacity of older people or our own later life, we will underinvest in it, which then creates this vicious circle of an aging society with all its negative connotations. That positivity, I think, may also explain a desire to invest in it. But I also wanted to ask you, and I can't avoid asking it. There's this Ig Nobel Prize, the Scott Newman work around birth certificates, and you've been stressing the reliability of your records. I just didn't know if you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, sure. Well, we have to realize that this researcher is a plant scientist, not a demographer. He paid to place an opinion article that no scientist has. First of all, it's not even published, so it's not peer reviewed.
Yeah.
And he compiles a number of misleading and sort of tangential arguments. Yes, there is fraud. And there's age exaggeration elsewhere. But it's funny. It's 20 years ago when I got the grant from the National Institutes on Aging and the big assignment for National Geographic. I basically used Saul, this demographer, this plant scientist arguments to get the story, to get assigned the story, and we spent 3 years doing the exact same thing that was done wrongly elsewhere. And, journalists are busy. Demography is tough to understand. To read the papers, how complex they are. So it is much better clickbait to say Blue Zones is a fraud than it is to actually read the paper. The 5 demographers that did the work, they're peer reviewed. They're career demographers. They've never once been quoted. They've never once been called up for these journalists to understand the deep work they did. Instead, this plant scientist has relentlessly pitched his non-peer review article for 5 years, and finally got a satirical award, which captured the attention of all these hack journalists around the world. And, the headline is juicy. Blue Zones is a fraud. But if you actually take the time to read the papers, the demographers, you see it's not. It's built on a very solid foundation of academic work by peer-reviewed pros. And it's the world we live in, and it'll blow over.
Well, the other thing I think is interesting about all this, it just shows, and I think this is, for me, one of the interesting things about Blue Zones. We're still very thinking about chronological age. So the notion that someone is old when they're 105 or 100 seems to me a little bit crazy. And I think, I'm get very excited about this, but it can sound a bit obscure. But I'm fascinated by the fact that chronological age is a pretty recent invention in humanity. Most countries didn't have good record keeping 200-300 years ago. The song Happy Birthday, I think, is a 1930s invention in terms of the lyrics. For most of human society, we didn't know when we were born or how old we were. And there's a lovely example in 1601 in England where Queen Elizabeth is introducing the Poor Laws. And the Poor Laws are to look after the poor and the old. But this is a world where no one knows how old they are. There's no chronological measures. There's no birth records. And old is literally seen as you've been around for a long time and you can't look after yourself. So if you've been around for a long time and you can look after yourself, you're not old. And I think that's a sort of a really sort of nice way of thinking about it, because, of course, what you're focusing on in the Blue Zones is people are old, and you've got the birth records, but irrespective, they're old and they're aging better and they're disease-free for longer and they're active. And that's sort of about not being old. And I think that's kind of the key thing. It's not really the quantity of life we're focusing on here. It's about the quality of life. So
in general, Andrew, if you've lived a long time, the longer you've lived, the healthier you've been. But you're right. We have this phenomenon now worldwide. I'm sure you're aware of it, that actually life expectancy is going up in the developed world. But as a result, we're getting more older people who are sicker for longer.
Yeah.
So really parsing out the policies, the lifestyle, the insights that can help populations avoid chronic disease. Because, I love your work and this idea that if you delay retirement for a decade or so, it's the most effective economic hack. You add, I think you said 4 or 5 points to
Yeah,
the GDP or something like that. By the way, in blue zones, many of them do not even have a word for retirement.
yeah. Well, it's a
There's none of
bizarre
this.
word, isn't it? I mean, even if you think there should be a place when you stop work, to call it retirement, I think is just very strange.
Yeah,
To disengage, to retire. I mean, you want to be engaged in something. I may not be doing
that's
paid work anymore, but I want to be engaged.
Yeah, the retirement age was established not by people interested in the well-being of humans. It was established in the United States by the Social Security Administration to sort of calculate when the budget would be completely paid out.
Yeah,
And in these blue zones, there's words like ikigai, which roughly means reason for waking up in the morning, or plan de vida, a very purpose-infused sort of notion. And there's no artificial punctuation between people's useful and productive and meaningful life and a life of repose, a life of retirement. And I think that's such a key insight. And there's if policymakers were afforded a chance to understand the data, understand what things are driving healthy life expectancy elsewhere, and actually metabolize them into the laws and policies, there's so much low hanging fruit that has nothing to do with pharmaceuticals or rapamycin or stem cells or
yeah,
this hoaxy anti-aging industry that was getting all the attention.
yeah. Yeah, well, it goes back to they all want the silver bullet, not the silver buckshot. But yeah, I agree, and I think it's interesting what you're saying because medical systems do a tremendous job keeping us alive. I think one of the reasons we fear old age more is that in the past, fewer people would live long because they had to be good genetically or lucky, and now we've got medicine that can overcome some of those problems. So we do see ever more poor health. And then, as you say, we're not tackling those chronic diseases, which are utterly key. But if we design a life that says at 65, you're going to become ill and you're not going to work, it's not surprising we then worry about having a pensions crisis and a health crisis. So the fact in blue zones, you don't have that sort of same concepts. You don't have the health problems and you have that constant sense of engagement. That's, I think, the key model, isn't it? Now, blue zones are interesting because, of course, there's individuals and social norms and an environment. What about an individual, I know, living in central London or downtown Chicago, in Southside Chicago? How much do you think they can do things themselves, or how much are they really dependent on that environment and policy, etc.?
Well, the macro environment, I'd say, is slightly more important than your micro environment. I think the first thing as an individual to realize is that trying to change your behavior fails for almost all people, almost all the time in the long run. They're good marketing plans. They sell a lot of diets and supplements and superfoods and exercise programs, but they don't work. They don't work for us. Every new year, new resolutions. But realizing that if you can shape your surroundings so that your unconscious decisions are better, there you have something. So you start thinking about your home. There are evidence-based ways to change your kitchen so you eat less junk food. Simply taking the toaster off of the counter and having a junk food out of the way junk food drawer. And when many of us are on a seafood diet, we eat the food we see. So if we have a fruit bowl out instead of a chip bag, it makes a big difference in our unconscious decisions. Shaping how we get to work. Have we taken the time to map out how to walk or take public transportation? There's actually a very good study done in London, in fact, that showed that people who take public transportation over time have 19% lower rates of cardiovascular disease. So that would be an indication. Your friends. We know that if your three best friends are obese and unhealthy, there's a 150% better chance that you'll be overweight. Well, you have the power to shape your social environment, peopling them with either people who sit around and eat chips and drink beer and complain, or people whose idea of recreation is walking or playing tennis or bicycling, people who eat healthy, eat a largely a whole food plant based. People care about you on a bad day. These are all ways to, for the long term, shape your environment. So it's about not relying on a program. It's about thinking of an operating system, to use a metaphor,
Mm.
and look at every facet of your life and say, how can I set things up so I'll unconsciously make healthier decisions for the long run? And that's the big idea. And that's what really works. I can't make any money off of you for doing that. That's why it's
Yeah.
not popular. A pharmaceutical company can't sell you anything. Doctor's not going to make any money because you're going to come in less. Hospital, you're not going to be renting beds in hospitals. But boy, it works.
Yeah. Yeah. And I suspect, I noticed you've got 3 Guinness records for distance cycling. So I suspect you're a person who's already got pretty good habits. But anything you yourself have found particularly useful to do that you want to share with us?
I live on a beach in Miami, and I look at the ocean. And when we're done here, I'm going to be swimming in that. It's easy and it's alluring. Uh, I've kind of recurated my social circle in the last decade, and most of the people I surround myself with are healthy. I've let go of the ones who do unhealthy things, smoke and drink too much, because it influences me. I don't smoke, but
Yeah.
I would drink. Um, I eat mostly a whole food plant based diet. I'm a big believer in getting all your calories in a to 6 or 8 hour window, which we've seen in many blue zones. I excuse me. If you want a longevity strategy that I think actually works, start eating at noon and be done at 6 or 7 at night. I believe that really works at losing weight and mopping up um, zombie cells, senescent cells, and lowering inflammation. And I think that works. But yeah, mostly I pick environments and
Yeah.
live in environments that are healthy, and it
Well, I was
works.
taken by your 19% number about cardiovascular health and the London Underground, which it must be a bigger effect than that because it's so stressful, the London Underground. So if you still see a reduction, it must be an even bigger one. But tell me about the Netflix series, which I have to say has been phenomenal. I mean, when I talk about longevity to people, the reaction is limited, and certainly older people in general, from 50 plus, they were interested in it. But the Blue Zone seems to have captured the imagination through Netflix of so many different age groups and people. So what sort of response have you had to it?
Yeah, it was the top 10 in 83 countries, and it
Wow.
was number one in the United States. It won 3 Emmy Awards, and
Congratulations.
I was very deliberate about it. I knew I don't have sexy science. I don't have a rapamycin or some graphic of how this intervention is going to make you live to 120. So I found a director from a program called Chef's Table, and we interviewed him, and it captures him. They use Hollywood production values to make food look unbelievably delicious and tell a good story of a chef. And we talked for 3 hours, and he said, well, essentially I make food porn. And I said, I want longevity porn. So Netflix was very generous. They gave us a huge budget, and we had the best cinematographers. We had an orchestra score the
Wow.
music. People don't realize how important music is. And my goal was to make aging look aspirational, to marshal in the science to show how these people got there, and then make their lives look aspirational. And by the way, we often we're worried about getting older, but I also wrote a cover story for National Geographic on happiness, the data
Yeah.
underpinnings of happiness. And when it comes to happiness, you tend to be quite happy in your 20s. Your worst years are in your 40s and 50s, and then happiness continues to rise into your hundreds. So actually, the cohort of people over 90 are among the happiest people. You have that to look forward to. So it's not all gloom and doom getting old. And I tried to bring that forth in the Netflix special, and it worked.
Yeah. No, fantastic. Brilliant. And what next for Blue Zones?
I'm working on new blue zones. I'm working with the Global Burden of Disease Project to identify areas in the
Ah,
world with the highest health adjusted life expectancy.
yeah,
Another data back program, but then the whole idea is once you find these places to marshal in the policies
yeah,
and the sort of culture and the proactive things that these places are doing. And these, Andrew, adds a lot of the blue zones are disappearing. We talked about Okinawa for a minute. Okinawa is not a blue zone anymore. Why? Because American food culture has completely corrupted it. It's crisscrossed by highways. The culture's leaving. So these new places are manufactured blue zones. They're places like Singapore. I know we're both fans of Singapore, where an enlightened leadership has proactively looked at the evidence and shaped policies that favor human health, not business interests, not necessarily economic growth, but really the well-being of people. And I found three people, and I'm trying to bring that to life right now. It'll be a big National Geographic article and book, and I'm back doing what I love to do, which is the research.
yeah. Well, fantastic too. But also the way of that vision capturing heads and hearts to bring about change is clearly what's needed. And we've never had to live such long lives, and we've urgently got to find a way to do it that's affordable. So I love the fact so many countries are interested in what you're doing. I would like to end on a positive note, but I suspect we're not going to. And I suspect, like me, you're probably optimistic about what we can achieve through society, let alone science. How do you think the US is going along the sort of path to being a blue zone? What's your reaction in terms of society, individuals, business, government, and the US?
I don't think there's much hope in the federal government, quite honestly. I think we have a political system where the lobbyists, the business interests, tend to carry the day. One candidate will be worse than the other. I won't name names, but so I'm not optimistic that we'll see any federal laws. But you know what, Andrew? Government happens at the local level. And municipal governments, mayors and city councils, they can get a lot done in just a few years. And and we have dozens of examples: Fort Worth, Texas; Jacksonville, Florida; Phoenix, Arizona, that have embraced this idea. We're going to set up our people for success. We're going to shape the environment so that their choices are healthier and more salient, and the healthy choice is more salient and more affordable. And there's where the big bright spots lie, and that's portable. Anybody can do it.
Yeah, yeah,
It requires, though, sort of dropping this idea, this delusion that we're going to get millions of people to change their behavior. It's never going to happen. We need to shape their environments and set them up for success. And there is where the hope lies.
yeah. No, I think it's great. I couldn't agree more. And I think they're showing where it can work in a few places. It will then quickly catch on and be shown to be done elsewhere as well. So the power example is huge. Thank you, Dan. Thoroughly enjoyed the conversation and your work as well. Thank you so much for your time.